This is part 3, section 8 of Common Sense Economics, and we're talking about transfers, and not just what transfers are, but also maybe the unintended consequences of them and what incentives they create. So in a transfer, simply put, in any way, if anything similar to what I'm about to describe happens, it is a transfer. So a transfer is taking money from one individual and giving it to another, okay? Be they individuals, be they businesses, states, right? It could be states getting money from another state. It could be businesses getting money from another business. It could be businesses getting money from another state. It could be businesses getting money from another individual. Anything like that, okay, is a transfer, okay? It doesn't matter if you're rich getting money from someone else or if you're poor getting money from someone else. It is a transfer. A transfer is a transfer is a transfer. So one thing I want to look at as we kind of focus on here, and this will kind of be the theme to our lecture today, because we're talking about transfers, but one of the most common type of transfers is transfers from those that are wealthier to those that don't have as much wealth, right? We call these welfare transfers, okay? So one thing we can see here on this graph is that since the 60s, you haven't really seen much of a decrease in the poverty rate. Okay, it's been sitting right around 15, maybe 13% ever since the 60s. And the only thing that's happened since then is that we started our programs that are really trying to transfer money into the hands of those that are less wealthy. So why is it that welfare has remained, not welfare, sorry, that poverty has remained constant? Could it be that, poverty just really sticks around this rate? Because while this graph and the book does focus on, it was decreasing a lot the decades before, because you can see that, right? If we go from the 50s up to the 60s, you can see that it was decreasing greatly, right? And if you look throughout history, right, poverty has been decreasing greatly. And if you even look across the world, poverty has been decreasing greatly. It's really been in the States where it's been remaining kind of stagnating, right? So we're going to look at, and what the book argues and what I may argue myself is really a cause of us having these welfare transfers, okay? So we start this war on poverty, right? And spoiler alert, if you ever want to win a war, don't go to war with a noun, okay? We've gone to war with drugs, we're losing. We're gone to war with poverty, poverty still exists. We've gone to war with terrorism, terrorism still exists. If you ever want to win a war, don't go after a war. Don't go after a noun in a war, okay? That said, though, one may argue that if you're going to war, you may not want it to end, because wars can be good for politics. Anywhoosie, let's go on. The war on poverty. So, after falling for decades, the poverty rate really hasn't changed since the 60s, right? We just saw that on this graph. Even though we have increased the amount of money that we've been transferring to those that are impoverished, we have not seen people leave poverty, okay? There's been no change in the poverty rate since then, okay? Hasn't gone down, hasn't gone up. Was going down before, but now it's kind of remaining the same, okay? Hey, but bright side me, okay? Hasn't gone up, so that we have that going for us, right, guys? Oh, well. So, are the results good or bad? I mean, they're certainly not good. I mean, poverty hasn't continued to decrease, okay? Someone a little bit more aggressive may say that they're bad because they say, oh, well, it was trending downwards after, and after we started the war on poverty, it hasn't gone down anymore. I don't know if I'm that aggressive. The results are no surprise, though, right? Because really what we're thinking about here is that the transfers, they're going to have a hard time changing the poverty rate because we're really changing people's incentives. They're going to have also some unintended secondary consequences that we aren't able to see, right? We don't have enough information, right? As an individual, as a group of experts, we don't have enough information to know what certain policies are going to have, right? But when policies are made, they're kind of set in stone, whereas when individuals make decisions, right, they can change on the fly. So we don't know what's going to happen when we make a policy, but now that we're able to look back on those policies that were created, we can kind of see what the effects of them have been, be they an immediate effect in what they haven't achieved, and some secondary effects on what they have achieved. So we'll look at those throughout the rest of this lesson. And one thing we can look at today, when I say that we have been spending money on transfers, right, taking money from one group of taxpayers to another group of taxpayers, transfers make up almost 50% of the U.S. budget. Now, of course, I'm assuming this number includes transfers that are also going to businesses, transfers that are going to citizens that buy things that have tax credits, like a Tesla, right? That may one day be me, but today, no way. Anyways, we can certainly talk about that after, Darth. So there's some unintended consequences, right? Talk about secondary side effects, okay? Income transfers, they are incentives, right? I mean, whenever you are working, you're working to get money, right? So we talked about earlier, when you're being taxed, that decreases your incentive to work. So if we increase taxes to provide a transfer to somebody, if we increase taxes to then take those increased tax dollars and give them to those that are less fortunate, we're going to be decreasing the incentive for someone to produce, right? We're going to be really reducing the incentive, or we could say that we, by increasing the taxes, we are lowering the marginal benefit of someone that's already producing, right? Like if I'm making $60,000 a year, we increase the tax rates. Well, now I'm earning less than I otherwise would on that top dollar that I would have earned, right? And we know that when people earn money, when people produce, they're helping others, right? So really, we're reducing their incentive to help somebody else, right, voluntarily. And those that are receiving those transfers, well, they also now, if you're already earning, $600 a month or $1,200 a month, and now if you want to go work, you're already getting $1,200 a month, right? To get you out of bed, you're going to have to be earning more, right? To go from, instead of going from $0 to $1,300 a month, you're now going from $1,200 a month to $1,300 a month. Someone may be like, yeah, whatever, I'm already getting money. Why get up and go, right? So it decreases the incentive to start working for those that already aren't working, okay? And there's also that, but to qualify for these transfers, you have to do whatever the law says will qualify you for them, right? So you, instead of doing things to better yourself and be able to produce more, you're going to be spending resources to qualify for transfers, right? So whether this is a business doing something a certain way so that they can get a subsidy, or if it's a consumer buying a certain product, that way they can get the tax credit from the government, or if it's a person, not looking to do much work, so that way they can continue to receive some sort of transfer payment, okay? Now, you may end up, not producing just because you don't want to sacrifice that transfer, right? Because you'd rather have what you'll get than, maybe potentially sacrifice that transfer going out and doing something else, right? If I know that I can get $1,200 a month not working, and I may be able to get, $1,400 a month and maybe keep that job, that's a maybe. This is 100%, right? So, people have to, when they take into account their risk, it may not be worth going out and risking the loss of that transfer, okay? So, another thing we have to think about that's kind of sad, but you cannot deny the presence of it, is that adversity, right? Being in a situation where you have to receive transfer payments because you're impoverished, that being impoverished is quite an incentive to want to work, to want to produce, yeah? So if we remove that incentive, or if we lessen it, I don't really want to focus on whether or not we should do that, but you can certainly argue that that decreases the incentive to avoid adversity, okay? And certainly there are some things that can put you in adversity, right? There are some risky decisions that you could make, where if we give you money while, the risk, does come to fruition, and, you were partaking in a risky lifestyle, and now you find yourself impoverished, people would be more likely to take that risk if they knew that they would be able to get transfer payments during that time where they are receiving those payments, right? So, and what I mean by that is, think about this. Think about risk, right? So living in a hurricane-prone area is quite risky. So what if we made it so that those that got hit by a hurricane got federal dollars sent to them to help them rebuild? Well, we know that more people would build in those areas if that policy were a thing, right? So when we increase the subsidy for that risky behavior, we get more of that risky behavior. If we increase the transfers going to single mothers, we're going to get in essence, more single mothers, okay? So if we want to reduce poverty, if you want to make sure that you avoid poverty, right? I mean, these are suggestions for you guys. 3 things that you can do that as you look across statistical averages, you can see that these 3 things will lead to the statistical, what's the word I'm looking for here? Probability that you will be impoverished. Graduating high school, working full-time, and waiting until you're ready, or until I think it was Brookings Institute, the study, waiting until you're married to have kids, right? Kids are expensive. Graduating high school will enable you to have a better job, and working full-time will ensure that you have money, right? And that whole money thing will help you avoid poverty, okay? So, defining poverty, really hard to do, right? Because a lot of these programs, they take money from others and they give it to the poor. And who is poor? This is a hard concept, right? Because it's relative, right? Relative to Africa, our impoverished here in America are incredibly wealthy, right? Relative to Hitler, I am an angel, right? I am the best person ever. But if you compare me to Mother Teresa, I become a demon. Yeah. So in the same way that goodness is relative, so too is, wealth, right? It's a hard thing to compare, right? Because compared to Jeff Bezos, I am nothing, right? As far as wealth is concerned, I own nothing compared to him, yeah? The dude has a little bit of cash, yeah? But of course, compared to Mother Teresa, I don't know. He had an affair, right? Is that what he did? I don't know. He lost his wife. Let's go on. Anyways, let's watch this video here about income mobility. And because people always like to say the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And statistically, that may not be the case. There is a way, way better series that I'm about to show you. The only reason why I'm showing this one is because of this right here. You'll notice it's only 3 minutes long. But there's a much better series of episodes done by Russ Roberts that if you'd like to watch, I think he calls it Numbers Game. It's on YouTube. You can watch it. And it talks about this idea of wealth mobility here in the States. Hello, Knight.
One often heard contemporary economic myth is that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Like any myth, there is a nugget of truth to this. For example, if we look at the data, the top 20% of income earners today do have a larger share of national income than they did in the past, and the bottom 20% of income earners do have a smaller share of national income than they had in the past. There's 2 problems with that data. First of all, that data doesn't tell us anything about the absolute condition of the poor. Just because one has a smaller share of income doesn't mean that one is absolutely poor. So for example, it could be the case that even though poor Americans have a smaller share of national income, their absolute income is higher. If I asked you, would you rather have a 1/6 of a pizza or a 1/9 of a pizza? Your answer might depend on how big the pizza is. And having 1/9 of a pizza might be better if the pizza was much larger than the one of which you have 1/6.
The size of the pie
The
matters.
total income of the poor Americans today is higher than it used to be, even though their share of total income is somewhat lower. But all this misses the more fundamental point. The bigger problem is that data is snapshot data that compares wealthy people in one year with wealthy people in years before, poor people in one year, poor people years before. What it doesn't take into account is the movement in individual households through time. If we could track individual households, we might be able to know what happens to poor people in, say, 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. And
because we have poor people being created every day, right? We have a lot of people that are going to graduate school this year and now are going to be poor, right? They don't have many skills yet. They can't earn a high income. So his point here is that we don't want to look at necessarily the poor in one period, the poor in another time period. We want to see, okay, we have the poor in this time period. How well are these very same people doing in a future time period, right? Let's see how well they're going to grow.
in fact, we do have that data. One set of data shows that between 1979 and 1988, 86% of households that were poor in 1979 were no longer poor in 1988. A second set of data...
And real quick, one thing I do want to interrupt with, thank you for the raid, Burroughs. One thing I want to add is that this data is also relatively old. I know when a lot of people talk about wealth kind of stagnating, they mention the fact that wealth hasn't grown since, what, the 70s, even up till today. And this video only includes data that goes up until the 90s, I think.
Data from the University of Michigan
Welcome,
shows
guys.
that of households that were poor in 1975, over 95% of them were no longer poor by 1991. One of the most important things to understand when we talk about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer is this idea of income mobility. The reality is for most Americans that they start off poor and then they slowly become richer over time. And in fact, if we look at that data comparing 1975 and 1991, what we find is that the average income gain for rich households over that period was just about $4,000, but the average gain for poor households over that period, $28,000. So what really happened between 1975 and 1991 is that the rich got richer, but the poor got richer a lot faster than the rich did. So whenever we talk about rich and poor, we have to take account of this issue of income mobility.
So, that's enough on that video. I think we're good. You get the idea, right? Yes, rich are getting richer, but so too are the poor, right? That should be a good thing, right? I mean, yeah, we can be jealous the rich are getting richer, but it's also a great thing the poor have been getting richer as well, at least with the data they presented and the other data that I've seen. Again, a great video is Numbers Game. Welcome, guys. Glad to have you. I teach economics. We are currently talking about transfers, right? And the incentives that are offered to those that are receiving them, getting them. And really what we're moving into now is talking about world poverty, right? Because we've looked at U.S. poverty, and U.S. poverty really hasn't changed since the 60s. And one of the reasons that economists who focus on incentives like to point out is that there are some secondary effects that occur when we have these wealth transfers in place. And those incentives that are created by those secondary effects tend to reduce the incentive for people to try to get out of poverty. So let's talk about world poverty. What's happened to world poverty over this time period? Well, shoot. Okay. Good thing is, world is this black line right here. The world has gotten much, much wealthier. We have many people living today in the world that no longer have to face, you know, that extreme poverty, which we define as $1.90 a day, and that's from World Bank data? Yeah, World Bank data. Okay. And you can also see that the Western states have kind of remained similar, whereas you see a lot of progress being made in Africa, a lot of progress being made in South Asia. And a lot of this, too, has become as more and more market-based economies have been accepted, and more property rights have been started to be protected in these areas. Here in the States, let me just include this, just a good example for what poverty looks like, and can kind of help you to empathize with people and see that I don't know. I don't want to tell yourself tell yourself to compare yourself to someone that may be in poverty, and maybe see where you line up, right? Because you know, it really puts things into perspective, and I don't know, hopefully incentivizes you to give, right? We can talk about, you know, increasing taxes, but you can also give yourself, right? You don't have to have it taken away from you involuntarily to give to those that are struggling, you know. Trump made 750 in a year. Is he poor? No, he just has a really good or maybe unscrupulous accountant. All right, let's watch this, because there are some arguments as to what we can do for poverty, because obviously what we've been doing here in America since the 60s is not working, right? Poverty has remained constant at 10 to 15%. It hasn't changed that much, whereas in the world during that same time period, poverty has been decreasing, right? So why is it in the Western states that poverty is not decreasing anymore, right? And an economist, an Austrian economist, may argue that it's because of these wealth transfer programs that the poverty rate is not decreasing anymore in the West, because we've accepted programs like those that are in the war on poverty, right? So one way to do this is to replace the programs with something that many have called a universal income, or perhaps a or what Milton Friedman was talking about when he was popular. He's super dead now, which was the negative income tax. So we'll go ahead and watch trying to skip ahead to where it is. This isn't exactly where it is. We'll watch until he gets there. But yeah, universal basic income is one thing we'll watch in this video after. Where even libertarians, right, people that think the government should have no hands on your money, even support these if you're directionless at least. So let's have a look.
If it grows out of the self-help of people like the people we've been talking to, then if it's a paternalistic venture undertaken by governmental civil servants and bureaucrats, that we should get rid of a large part of... This is the idea.
Here we go.
That we should get rid of a large part of the welfare bureaucracy.
So he's saying get rid of all the welfare that we currently have, but it doesn't stop there.
Fundamentally by giving them money. With the positive income tax, you're entitled to a certain amount of personal exemptions and deductions, and above that amount you pay tax. But suppose you have no income. Under a negative income tax, a fraction of your unused exemptions would be paid to you by the government, guaranteeing at least a minimum income.
So everyone has a minimum income or a universal basic income.
If you earn something, you'd still get a fraction of your unused exemptions, and you'd end up better off.
So let's say there's $5,000 in exemptions. As you earn more money, you'll get less of that $5,000, but it won't ever be a point where you're still going to end up with a net profit, right? You're not going to lose more of your exemptions than you would have gotten. We actually accepted this, something very similar to this here in the States with the earned income tax credit, right? Where everyone gets the earned income tax credit, or at least those that earn under a certain amount here in the States get the earned income tax credit, where you get money from the government so long as you're working, and then the more you earn, the less of that you get.
As your earnings rose, the supplement to your income would become smaller and smaller until your earnings equaled your exemptions. At that point, you'd break even, neither paying tax nor receiving a subsidy. It's not an ideal system. It's not the system we might have liked to get into, but it's a system which would have the effect of eliminating the separation of the society into those who receive and those who pay, a separation that tends to destroy the whole social fabric. It would mean that we could each of us take advantage of opportunities that opened up without fearing that if by some chance we lost our jobs, it would be a long time before we could get back on assistance. It would be a system that would give all of us an incentive gradually to improve our lives, would perhaps enable us over time to work ourselves out of the kind of mess we've gotten ourselves into. A mess we've gotten ourselves into for the very best of motives, but with the very worst of results.
Okay. What I want to watch now is this video, and I don't necessarily like the podcast that he's on. I think it's a podcast. But there's a good economist who went on this show, and some of you can realize that this is the Rubin Report. I'm not a fan of the Rubin Report, but I am a fan of this guy over here on the right. So he talks about why even if you're a person that, like an economist, thinks that, taxes, they tend to have this negative effect where it reduces the incentive to earn, and transfers, like we've talked about in this lecture, will decrease the incentive to earn for someone that's receiving them as well, where even if you look at that idea, you may still be in favor of what's called a UBI, or a universal basic income, which essentially just means the government sends you a check each month. Okay, everybody.
So I think universal basic income is a better solution than the hodgepodge of different intrusive programs that we have now. And let me explain briefly why. So what we have is a system.
The Rubin Report is right-leaning. This guy here, I think, is a libertarian.
I wrote a pretty incendiary paper about this. The state is a bad polygamist. So if you're a single mother and you have 3 children, if you do one of 2 things, you'll lose your support from the polygamist. If you get a job or get married. If you actually do something that achieves some independence for yourself, your husband, the state, will we're getting a divorce.
Right.
I don't care. I mean, you can have more children, you can have affairs, but you have to be committed to me. You can only get support from me, which means that you can't do any of the things that normally we would expect, and this is a conservative position, I suppose. Family and jobs are good things. Being married and having a job is a good thing. We have what many people, even on the left, have called the cliff effect of benefits. If I'm in Section 8 housing and I get subsidies
Section 8 is
for
government
food,
housing
I
they
get
have to qualify
subsidies
for.
School, the first $10,000 that I earn costs me $12,000 in benefits. So the poor aren't lazy; they're rational.
Right. So they're really, it's just a realistic game. Not I don't want to say game. They're not playing a game, but they're making calculations.
It's a game in the technical sense.
Yeah.
They have choices, they have strategies, those have payoffs.
Yeah.
It's unsurprising they pick the ones that make them better off because they're desperate. They can't afford to lose this money.
So for example, if you're living through subsidized housing in a decent area with a decent school, and even if you don't want those handouts, well then you realize, well, I'm gonna have to work a third job now, and then they're gonna force me to move to a much worse place to live.
It's a good question, team. We'll talk about that here in a sec.
So the state is a bad polygamist. Let's stop doing that. So to me, universal basic income that's given without strings, we take the money that we're spending now, which is enough to give at least $12,000 per poor people. So you take the amount that we spend, divide it by the number of
Where are we taking that from?
Well, all of these different subsidy programs.
Oh, so all of the subsidy programs then go to...
So including Social Security. So we eliminate all those.
Yeah.
Use that money to give everyone a universal basic income. And if they get a job, they don't lose it. If they get married, they don't lose it. They can use it for child care. One of the problems that people have now is it's very specifically tied to a location. So I can't go somewhere where there's a job because I won't be able to establish myself. Universal basic income, if it's federal, means that if I'm living in Cleveland, Ohio, I can't find a job, and there are jobs in Texas or North Carolina. When I get there, I get universal basic income. I can establish myself, I can pay for child care, I can look for a job, and there actually are jobs in those places.
Yeah. Do you find a conflict between your libertarian self and your economist self on this? Because it seems like the idea, a libertarian going, the state should give people money, probably seems like there's some fight there, right?
Sure, if you're a destinationist. If I'm a directionalist, I say, dude, we're giving them the money now.
Right, we're already doing it.
We're already doing it. Let's just give the money in a way that's cheaper and increases liberty. That's the big...
And another thing he doesn't mention here, they continue to talk. I want to just make sure I get into, to finish up the lecture here, I have to go catch a run before it gets too cold outside. One of the things we talked about with income, I guess, transfers, right, is that people may spend resources to qualify for those transfers, right? People may not work because they want to still qualify for those transfers, right? There is the cliff effect that, you know, because of all the different transfers that you qualify for, be it schooling, housing, food stamps, whatever, right? If you make over a certain amount, all of a sudden you're going to lose a whole bunch of those, right? So, you know, by you going to work, you actually end up netting a loss because you don't qualify for the transfers you used to get, right? So by having it be something like UBI where everyone gets it anyways, you don't, and of course it's in replacement to all of that, so, you know, everyone loses those, but of course the idea is that this would add up to be more than that. The idea here, I feel like whenever I take these off, I talk super loud. I just want to make sure I'm talking at a good level. The idea here is that this reduces, you know, the resources that are spent to try to, you know, qualify for these transfers. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next lecture.